You're watching PEGRI TV, Rhode Island's public access channel.
Welcome everybody to the Four Corners, brought to you by the Official Wrestling Museum. We are your hosts. I am Angel, and I'm joined by the Official Wrestling Museum's Hall of Famer,
No life.
and we are here this week on the Four Corners talking about what?
So the idea is crossovers as far as guys who went from one promotion to another. It doesn't have to be WWE, WF, or WCW. You could throw ECW, AEW, whatever for. It doesn't have to be the best, doesn't have to be the worst. This week, I think, and if it's all right with you, I think this is something that could be an ongoing, much like what we did with when we did Off the Ropes, the movie series, where that's going to continue.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we'll continue next week.
Right.
Every couple of weeks we'll come back to it because there's just so many.
There is a lot.
And when we're not doing our best and worst, we're just, hey, today I want to talk about these four. And, and that's how it is. And then maybe a month from now, okay, let's do a part two and we'll talk about another four each or whatever.
Yeah.
So that way tonight, not necessarily honorable mentions because it's not a best and worst.
Right.
We can dedicate a little bit more time to each one.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So yeah, do you want to go first or do you?
Yeah, I'll go first. And what's cool about this show is it's, the history of wrestling and where it's taken each of the wrestlers over the period of time. Just like back in the day with NEWA, RIWA, or NEWA to Primal Conflict or NEWA to APCW, and it's the history and it's the legacy and the memories that you get from professional wrestling. That's why June 13th is so important. It's right around the corner for us to celebrate and say thank you to those that graced the ring, because Professional Wrestling Day is indeed real here in the state of Rhode Island. And if you scan that QR code, you can help make it national. It takes 10 seconds, totally free to do. Sign our petition, it'll be great to go. If we're going to talk over people jumping ship, impacts it's made, didn't make.
That's a better term. I say crossover. Jumping ship is.
I'm going to have to go with, right off the bat, Bret Hart going to WCW.
That was.
Has to be.
I was like, okay, I would like to talk about Bret, but I figured you would. Yeah, that's definitely one.
Sergeant Stryker. I got you, man.
That's definitely one that's of note to talk about because I just feel like you couldn't have fumbled a ship jumping any more than that. You had the hottest star in the business that the Montreal Screwjob had just happened a month prior. And it's like you're being given on a silver platter the hottest star in the business at the time, who was just in one of the hottest moments in wrestling at the time, or all time, and you just dropped the ball with it.
They really did. I don't know if they knew what they wanted to do with him, and I don't think he really knew what he wanted to do.
It could be that it was so sudden.
It could, because
but that's why you gotta.
He had so much anger in him, which was okay. I would probably say, okay, book him as somebody to, granted, I know NWO was going on, but to be against the office, to be against that kind of stuff. But Bret Hart wasn't that type of worker for that long. Even though he had that going into the last, run he had with WWE, it was still the feud with Shawn Michaels. It was still more against, the American people because he was from Canada. I just think it was I think it was too quick that a major thing in his career that affected him personally wasn't able to take the time to understand and go through it. and it just led into being blinded. And if you think, they started doing something with him, then his brother passed away.
Yeah.
So now, not only his brother passed away, he passed away by doing a stunt on the company that just, did him wrong.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then what do? You had it was a great tribute match they did. Took some time off, came back, jump into the NWO.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And Bret Hart and NWO was just, it never made sense. Here, I'll throw this up. This is what my idea would have been. Not at the time, but in hindsight. Montreal Screwjob happens. Now you're at WCW. Main event to Starrcade is Hogan and Sting, which they had built for a year. So in my mind, you should have the ending of that feud in your head if you built it for a year. But what they did was take the ending of that feud and they shoehorned Bret Hart into it because now they have him. And now remember he came out with the ref was, it's a whole big botch. The ref was supposed to do the fast count. It never really was a fast count. Bret Hart came out and he's like, I'm not going to let this happen. What I would have done was not even have Bret Hart at Starrcade. I would have had Sting beat Hogan fair and square.
Yep.
And because that story needed the heroes to win finally. You built it up for a year. So they, not only with Bret Hart coming in, they fumbled that, they in turn fumbled the whole NWO Sting storyline that they built up. So you have Sting beat Hogan clean. The next night on Nitro, Hogan maybe comes out and he's, Sting, blah, 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 wants his rematch. Bret Hart then makes his appearance, comes out. Sting can then go on to say like Macho Man or whoever, next down in NWO, but Bret Hart comes out, goes for Hogan, we have unfinished business, and then you can start Bret Hart right at the top against Hogan. It's not for the title, but it you know what I mean? It's such a cleaner way to do, but then they just, was Bret Hart in the NWO, was he not? It really was kind of...
It was. It was definitely confusing, and don't get me wrong, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, they're big players. Macho Man, Randy Savage, big players. But they seemed that they fit like they were the players, they were somebody big, and you had people underneath Hogan. Because Hogan was calling the shots. With Bret Hart being there and being so dominant with WWE for so long, it kind of felt like he just didn't belong there.
Yeah, it was it was an odd fit.
I would have loved to see Bret and Sting get into a series. They could have easily had Bret come in, play that kind of middle person that you don't really know what's going on with him yet, feud out with Sting, sharpshooter against the Scorpion Deathlock would have been awesome. I think fans would have got into it. You probably could have stretched it for quite some time because you had the NWO angle. It would not have been anywhere close to the Bret Hart Owen Hart feud, but it would have been kind of similar with the sharpshooter finish on both of them. With the Scorpion Death Drop. I think it would have been marketable.
At the same time, too, Bulldog and Anvil also came over at the same time. And they just never really
did anything with any of them. It was sad.
So
all right, who's going to be your first pick?
I was going to say, that's definitely
we could talk about Bret all day long.
Sorry about that. Had COVID, so. Anyway, the first one that I really would like to talk about is one that I think is like unlike any other ship jumping. Brian Pillman, when he left WCW, because he not only went to WWE, he made a stop in ECW first. And now it's what it is, like, okay, I've heard different versions. Okay, him and Bischoff talked it over. Him and Sullivan had came up with it. What was the true thing? So it's like him and Bischoff talked it over. Bischoff released Pillman. He was doing the loose cannon gimmick and kind of, he went crazy in WCW, gets released from his contract, goes to ECW, makes a stop there, and he was about to do look like a little feud with Shane Douglas, who was the champion at the time. I believe he was the champion at the time. Either way, he was about, if he wasn't the champion, Shane Douglas was synonymous with ECW at the time. He was the main guy, even if he wasn't the champ. Raven might have been the champ at the time, I'm sorry. And then he has the accident in the Hummer, destroying his ankle, and it totally derailed where that whole angle was going to go. With it, he finally does sign with WWE, and it's revealed that this whole thing was a work for him to get out of WCW and into WWE. He worked Bischoff.
Yeah.
And making the stop in ECW was a part of it. And then he shows up in WWE, and I've always said that a lot of people will credit when Stone Cold when Steve Austin started doing Stone Cold, there's the Attitude Era. I think that Pillman doesn't get the recognition he deserves for the real start of the Attitude Era. I think that he was actually the spark, and Stone Cold took it and ran with it and became the guy that, he became the guy. But I think if Pillman wasn't there, and I think you had such a storyline with those two that just was not able to pay off because of Pillman's ankle. But you did get the Pillmanizer out of it, which is now when the guy puts his ankle in the chair.
Yep.
So, and just think of the match. I would have loved to see Pillman and Shawn Michaels. They did do one on Raw, but it wasn't. They really, if I remember correctly, they really didn't do much, and Pillman's ankle was junk. So it also changed Pillman from being a really world-class talent to a guy that really couldn't do what he could do. And then, unfortunately, he got pain pills and stuff and ended up passing away, about a year and a half into his run there. And
Yeah.
really, fit perfectly with the Heart Foundation. Like,
He did. That's a pretty good analogy of what can happen to somebody that's really good in the business, and then an accident happens, and back in the day, so many people got hooked on stuff because they were trying to fight through pain, and he definitely was a huge factor in how the industry was changing at that time. And it would have been interesting if he didn't hurt his ankle to see how well he would have played into it, because, you think Brian Pillman, you think that loose cannon, you think all that stuff, and
much like with Bret Hart, when you think of Brian Pillman, you think of WCW, really,
Yeah. That's
so
true,
it
yeah.
was also like, okay, here's a actual. I know he was in up in Canada in Calgary up there in that promotion, but
Stampede.
I'm sorry, it just couldn't hit me. Stampede. But other than that, he's WCW through and through. So,
Yeah.
So yeah, that was. I felt like that for me was one, and coincidentally enough, both of those guys were in the Heart Foundation.
Yeah.
So.
Now, my next choice is going to be somebody that jumps shipped over, and kind of similar to where both of them kind of didn't have that big, illustrious, at least in my eyes, career once they did the jump. And obviously, Pillman was because of his ankle and what happened, but Ric Flair going to WWE.
Is this now in '92?
In '92.
Okay.
And the reason why I'm saying this is, he came over, they put him in the '92 Rumble, okay? And back in the day, too, it was what's televised.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That was really what fans were catching, were understanding, was buying into. It wasn't the live events. It wasn't, what you could read in a magazine that you hope got published. I take that back. It was, you follow along in magazines, but they really didn't tell you all that size stuff. It was more of what you see, what you can invest into. And when he came in, Bobby Heenan was promoting the title going into it. Bobby Heenan put him over tremendously. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Being number 3 in the Rumble, I don't think he would have gone over that well, staying that long in, being a champion and just coming over. And when he became a champion, the mouthpiece he needed, the storyline he needed with Savage to keep him going. And then after that, it just kind of like fell off.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
I think Heenan was perfect for him to be the guy. So his vignettes were done in a different way, where instead of Ric Flair's coming or him cutting promos, Bobby Heenan would just show up with the belt and say, "This is the real world's champion belt." And the thing is, that belt was synonymous with Flair. So you would see that belt, you know who it is.
Exactly.
So, I've heard a lot of people say that they felt, now in hindsight, that his run at the time wasn't great. I disagree. I think it was, and then it fizzled out. I think, like you said, him coming in at number 3, having Bobby Heenan doing the commentary for that Rumble is probably the best piece of commentary
Ever for Rumble, I think.
It was great. And having Perfect even with him, it really put that package. He wasn't going to have the Horsemen, but it almost was like an Enterprise type of thing. I think there was some differences. Like Flair, it seems like Vince McMahon was okay, he was always in his robe. He never was like in a suit.
Yeah.
You know, he always had his robe on. So there were some things, but and then, you know, growing up, you're reading PWI, who's Hogan, Flair, and they did do a run, but you would think that would be the main event of Mania, and it never was. I mean, I know they said that they tried some house shows and the ticket sales weren't great, but it's like, come on,
You can't
I
really
gotta think
judge
that
by house
yeah,
shows,
I
though.
gotta think that you can't have a bigger match than Hogan Flair
No.
in my mind.
Even if you look at wrestling today, WWE can come to town for any house show with the biggest names on it, and it's soon not going to be a sellout.
I think
You know what I
yeah.
mean? They might at times, but for 99% of the time, they're not. But you say it's going to be a Raw or SmackDown pay-per-view, it's going to sell out. Just the idea of TV is what gets people to buy tickets more. So you can't really judge by what happens at a live event, you know what I mean? Because it's so much different when it's on TV because there's sanction on what they can do and what they can't, or can't.
I think that though, like, again, his first half of his run, his feud with Piper at first was great. Then he did what if you want to call it the thing with Hogan, but his thing with Macho Man was probably his best run there. And after that, then it kind of there was a lull.
Yeah.
And so I mean, Flair obviously definitely one to bring up.
I think what hurt him is he didn't have a character. He had a character, but it was a character
That's the thing.
from
That's
the
what I was getting at
80s.
with the robe.
Exactly.
That
it was
was
a
his
character
character,
from
yeah.
like the and it wasn't fitting into your Tatankas and
Right.
your earthquakes and
again,
you know what I mean.
Again,
And
he's
nothing against
synonymous
them, but
he's synonymous at that time, not even WCW with NWA, and it's like, what is that to Vince McMahon? You know,
Right.
You know, so I think for me, I have a couple guys in mind, but you know, when you said this, I thought you were going to talk about someone who made a couple jumps. So for me, someone that made a jump and then a jump back not too long after, and both of them were pretty big, was X-Pac.
X-pac.
Yeah, when he was 1, 2, 3 Kid, I mean, became a big star with Razor Ramon with that whole angle, and you know, did a pretty good job for what he was doing in WWF, and then he shows up on NWO one week, WCW 1 week, and he reveals he's a 6th member, and it's to take off 1, 2, 3 Kid. I always wondered, was it 1 + 2 + 3 = 6? Is he the 6th member? But then he had a pretty good run there. He was the cruiserweight champion.
Yeah.
Again, he had hurt his neck, so his ring work started to not be as great, or his aerial stuff. He was working like with Malenko and Eddie Guerrero, and so I mean the matches were pretty good, but he was more of like that sidekick character.
He always was a sidekick character.
Yeah.
But one thing with him is any character that he's played. Now, obviously, there was Lightning Kid when he was the jobber and stuff. So let's take 1, 2, 3 Kid. Let's take when he was just a kid, when he was X-Pac, 6. All these characters, every time he got a new gimmick, he had to kind of stop from the bottom and bring the character to the top. And he was able to do that with every single character. He was able to get you involved into his matches, invested into every one of his matches, and able to get over. He would make a phenomenal coach, I believe.
Oh, definitely.
You know what I mean? Because he has that ability to say, hey, look, this is what you have to do to get a whole new character, even though it's similar, but a whole new mentality out there. And remember the time on Monday Night Raw, he was taking, I forget the job he was working, and he kicked him, and the guy went flying, and he went flying right through the ropes.
Chris Hamrick, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that was like the
moment.
moment.
They said that he was the guy that you'd work him, then you'd work Scott, Shawn, and Diesel.
Yep.
Also, because I just realized we're taking so long on these. So now we're going to cut the X-Pac. But when he switched back to X-Pac, was even a bigger jump. He upped himself each time.
Every time.
Became a huge star as X-Pac. He was that first guy to make the switch and then make the switch back and then talk bad about WCW. So I know we're shortchanging the jump to WWF, but I was including that with the jumps. I want to say one. I'll go to my next one real quick because I'll make it short. Again, these aren't best or worst, just ones we're going to throw out. Mark Miro. I wanted to mention him because all of a sudden, he's Johnny B. Bad in WCW. Then all of a sudden, he's out there in WrestleMania 12, I believe, and Triple H had just lost to the Warrior.
Yep.
And they're like, we're here with Wild Man Mark Morrow. Because
Yeah.
they said his name wrong. And it's like, oh, that's Johnny B. Bad. And it's almost like, okay, they're going to have him there and make him a big star. And then the reason why I wanted to bring him up is just, not even just for that. I do think he reached mid-level heights with Mark Morrow, but he was the first guy in WWF to really get that contract, as opposed to the guarantee.
Yep.
And that's the reason why I wanted to bring that up.
I was always a big fan of Johnny B. Bad, and I
that's what
didn't mind Wild Man
Mark
Morrow either.
That's what they said Vince McMahon thought he was getting, but he couldn't use the names.
Right, and he was pretty good. And actually, Mark Morrow does a great bully speech and rally for schools
Yeah, he's
and
doing
stuff.
a lot of stuff
He does
now.
really good with that.
I think he did good, but he also came in, hurt his knees, and that changed his style.
It did.
So that we don't have to talk too much. I just wanted to mention
because we're gonna go
yeah.
short on time.
Right.
I'm gonna go with a whole nother company and then jump on over when Bobby Roode came from TNA over to NXT into WWE.
Okay. I was so excited for that. I always thought Bobby Roode would make a great Intercontinental Champion style guy, and he did good in NXT. And then when they brought him up to the main roster, it really nothing.
They really
never.
didn't do nothing with him. I didn't even mind him when he was teaming with Ziggler. I thought that
I
looked
just
all
felt
right.
like they didn't do anything with him.
I don't know if it was just injuries. Now he's an agent. He's writing for the company. I hear good things about him. The matches that you can see he's producing.
I could see him being a
looks
great
solid.
agent, yeah.
You know what I mean? He's a good, solid guy, quiet guy. But yeah, I wanted to bring him up because he's somebody that I wish they would have did more. But to me, that I think one of the biggest things from Impact over.
So for my fourth one, it's kind of a group of people.
Cheating.
Well, I'm looking at the time we have here, and I'm like, okay, I know I can tackle this.
I know who you're gonna say.
No, okay.
Maybe.
I don't think you do. It's a group of people, and basically, it's the group of people from WWE that kind of said, hey, they're not using me enough. I can go elsewhere and be used better. And those group of guys, to me, are Sean Spears, Rusev, Andrade, Malachi Black.
So you're talking about the
You don't even you could just write
AEW money guys.
All these guys were like, I can go here, and I will be used better. And half of them have gone back now to WWF.
Yep.
WWE, sorry. And the other half, it's like, have you Rusev? What's his name?
Miro.
Sorry.
Miro.
That's just it. I'm like, what's his name now? Because he's never on. I honestly feel like that whole group of guys, Keith Lee is another one to add to that group. I just feel like that's a group of people that I can go elsewhere and be used better, and they really weren't.
I think the thing too is,
And I'm not knocking them talent-wise.
no,
you know?
it's because it's really not them. If they're not put into the programs,
Yeah.
then it's not their fault. And AEW, we've talked about this before. They don't do long-term booking.
Right.
They really, really don't. And
Keith Lee will be on there.
that's the
Yeah.
biggest problem when you have all these guys that have per talent and you just toss them out once in a while.
I
It's
think
like,
injuries
what
also.
are you going to do?
Injuries is like, I know Rusev has been hurt a few times. Miro's been hurt. I'm sorry, he's the same guy. Keith Lee has been hurt a few times.
Yeah.
But there's other guys like Sean Spears. I know he was Cody Rhodes' good friend, so that might have played into his hiring. But it's just like Andrade. Why did he not be able to catch on in AEW? He's a great talent. In the month that he was at WWE on his return, already was put over better than he was his whole time there. So I just wanted to throw that whole group in there.
Yeah, it's kind of odd how that all falls. And so if we're going to talk, crossovers, all that stuff, I think, I have one guy in mind, and I think I'll save him for another show. Because I think we need to not honor, but I think it needs to be said because I think people at home will be like, why not this person?
Yeah.
It'll be Hulk Hogan,
Yeah.
jumping ship.
Is this who you want to talk about now,
Yeah.
or you want to save him?
No, we'll talk about him now
Okay.
because, we know.
Well, Hogan is two different jumps, like his AWA to
Right,
WWE.
I'm talking about, again, the WWE into WCW.
Yeah, okay.
You know what I mean? Again, and I think the only reason why I say again is because it's the more televised, the more seen. when he jumped over, it was like, oh my God, it was, I can't believe it. This thing's, here he is, here's Hogan. And then he turned heel.
Yeah.
And it was a really great heel run for him.
I think he
truly
had done
was.
everything he could do as a face. It wasn't hitting at that time because now you're hitting when you're hitting 96 or so, it's just that wasn't what the world wanted anymore.
No.
And it just, when he turned heel, totally refreshed him, gave him an extra few years, I believe, in WCW because really, there was nothing left for him to do in wrestling. He'd done everything. He won the heavyweight title his first night in the company. I disagree with that.
Yeah.
I don't think he should have. I think they should have done another. But at the same time, if you're handed Hulk Hogan and you want to build business, you know what I mean? How can you not want to put the belt on him?
Right.
I can tell you why. This is before he was announced to join WCW, how I knew he was going there. Because they started airing Thunder in Paradise on TNT,
Yep,
and
exactly.
and they showed him on WCW Saturday Night from Universal Studios, and I'm like, oh, they're showing, he's going there,
Right.
But I mean, yeah, we're kind of shortchanging Hogan's jump, but
I will also say though, Hogan did fantastic as Hollywood Hulk Hogan.
yeah,
Nothing against what he did.
Love Hollywood
If he
Hulk
wasn't teamed up with Hall and Nash, I think it would have been a lot tougher for him to
Right.
get that momentum. Because when
Hall and Nash had the cool
he
factor.
made that heel turn,
yeah,
it really wasn't impressive to me in the sense of how he was dropping the leg, how he was doing the stuff. It was Hall and Nash. It's like, and then the weeks after, it was like, okay,
Yeah.
this is what's happening.
I
This
think
is what's happening.
it was a
And
perfect
then-
storm. You had the shock factor of Hogan turning, but that would have only gone so far. You had the cool factor of Hall and Nash. You add the cool factor of Hall and Nash and Hogan, and then bring in an X-pac, and then a few of the old WWF
Yep.
guys. It just was the perfect storm. So really,
We need to do our corners.
So you just really was just talking the WWF to WCW because we
Yeah.
can go back to
Yeah.
his AWA.
It's totally different.
So I think definitely Bret Hart,
Yeah.
and he's got to be out of the four ones, the ones that we think are most influential, I guess.
Yeah,
I think Bret Hart.
definitely.
I think maybe like our Brian Pillman to me was done.
You know
like,
what? I would be good with Brian.
yeah, it was
Pillman.
done like no other.
And I'm also going to say I'll be okay definitely with X-pac because
Yeah.
he's always been a big factor and he knew how to play.
I think for
No
me,
pun intended with the factor.
I think for me the toss-up would be for the final one would be Flair and Hogan. Who was your third again? Oh, Bobby Roode. Yeah, so I think the toss-up for that final corner would probably be Flair or Hogan, and it's like, okay, look what we're talking about now.
Yeah.
The two biggest names ever, pretty much,
Right.
you know? Flair or Hogan, and it's like, and if you're talking about, both of them crossed over a couple times. So,
Yeah.
I think if you went with who had the, okay, so if we're
going
I'm not
with
saying to eliminate this, but in real quick and thinking,
Yeah.
if you eliminated the NWO run and say he just stopped before the NWO, remember he disappeared
Yeah,
for a
then
little
it
while?
would be-
If you compared that first half of the run with Ric Flair's first half of the run, Flair had the better half.
Definitely.
But if you compare
Yeah, the second half.
with Hogan's
yeah.
second half, I think Hogan's second half was far better than Ric Flair's.
Yeah.
So I would throw Hogan on there over Flair.
Yeah.
You know,
I was going to go with Flair.
see, this is what we need:
Yeah.
Striker or Danger Boy. We need a third
do.
guy. Although
We
Danger
do.
Boy would have said himself. So
Yeah, he probably would. You know what? Why don't we go with, we'll go with Hogan.
I'm fine with Hogan.
Yeah, we'll go with Hulk. That's nothing against all the AEW
I think
guys,
Hogan
too.
always went over on Flair
Yeah.
anyway. So,
So
it
we got
fits.
Brett Pillman, X-pac, Hulk Hogan. It was a really cool
You know
show.
what? I thought that we were gonna have so much extra time because we weren't doing like honorable
Right.
mentions, and here we are rushing them
Just-
out.
but that's-
I wanted
that's
to
that
talk
passion,
about.
that's that love
I
that we
wanted to
have.
talk about Miro more.
But make sure you guys check out that QR code for us. And we're very short on time, so we're going to wrap this up really cool. And
right.
you know what they say.
Come back next week and see what we throw in the corners.
See you next week, folks.